Shern, hi, how you doing? Welcome to One Good Take. How you doing?
Thank you very much. I'm great.
Yeah,
Happy to
great.
be
And
here.
you're out in Czechoslovakia or Czech
Yeah,
Republic,
yeah.
I should say.
Eastern Slovakia, near Košice, so close to the Ukraine border.
Okay,
Having
yeah.
an 80th birthday party.
Okay, yeah. And you're originally from the States?
Yeah, I was born in Washington D.C., um, but I've been living around the world for quite a long time. I did all my schooling in Melbourne, Australia. I was in Hong Kong for a little while, New York, LA, and now I'm based in Vienna, in Austria.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah,
that was
lovely.
sort of a roll of the dice. There's no narrative there. It's just yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, when I first
Interesting.
came across your name, I thought, oh, maybe Norwegian or of some sort of origin, because
Oh,
Shern is,
interesting.
uh,
My dad is like Punjabi Indian, so that's there's a bit there. My mom's just a hippie, so they settled on a name that kind of sounded like it could be both things
okay. Yeah,
without
yeah,
being anything. Yeah,
yeah.
pretty
So
much.
I first came across your work on YouTube, and it was
hmm
Ruin, the film
hmm
on Sam Bankman-Fried. Loved the film. What stood out for me was your approach to the material, to really digging deep to find out not just how these things happened, which is a typical documentary on this phenomenon, if you like, but also him as a person and also in connection with the zeitgeist. I thought that was really interesting. You kind of married those two together. How did you come about to make the film in the first place?
Well, I my background before this was mainly in commercials. Um, when I finished school, I needed to make a living, so I started making commercials. And someone told me early on that the the path of like making commercials and the path of making films are totally orthogonal. And if you want to do one, you should do it. If you want to do the other, you should do that. But there are a lot of people who make commercials who kind of feel like there's some step that's going to lead you into making films. I think this is not true at all, but that's sort of what you do. So I had been making there's this sort of like pseudo film overlap, which is like branded content.
Yeah.
So you make these films, and they very much feel like films, and I think quite a few people I've made them for, quite a few of these brands, really wanted to make something that was so-called content. I think you saw one of the ones I made for
Yeah,
Marriott.
I saw a few, yeah, I think they're lovely.
Yeah,
Really,
and
really
they're
well put
and they're
together.
fun and they're interesting because they're experimental in the sense that they don't really have like a what do you call it when you
Well, a
they don't
kinda
have
call to
numbers that
action.
they need to have.
Yeah, it's not like,
Yeah.
and you gotta do this, like a
No,
commercial.
it's kind
Yeah.
of just like make something interesting that will people will want to watch and think kindly of us as a result. So I had done one of these for Ford that was about a subject. Maybe I shouldn't say they thought they were being quite courageous by making this film, and then in the end, their leadership team thought maybe we shouldn't release this. It's a little bit. But in the process of making that, I worked with a producer who had done quite a lot of work for Bloomberg. And when this started, their head of content, he just come over from Forbes, and he wanted this to be the first like Bloomberg Originals film. Um, but they were moving very quickly, and they didn't have any like production experience at this level. They had a lot of journalists. They have very talented people working there, but like doing stuff with this vernacular is a very different thing. So the producer from Ford remembered me and he said, "Look, we're moving really quickly, but you guys should have a director and you should work with this guy." This is all a long way of saying I was just in the right place at the right time. Really
Yeah.
lucky, you know. And I was visiting a friend of mine in Oxford who had an NFT company that had a bunch of money on FTX. So as this was going down, um, I was he'd finish work for the day and we'd catch up on the news and watch it. So I was kind of just watching as like an observer. I didn't really have any dog in the fight yet. So as I was learning about this, I'm getting these calls from Bloomberg. So I had a bit of a primer like walking into it, and that's how it came about. I got hired because I happened to be staying with a good friend and watching the right news, and yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
But why
Okay.
it took the turn it did, why I wanted to cover those things in the film is because, like, I think he was a really fascinating character, right? For me, it wasn't just about a guy who, did some financial crime, and I think there's enough docs like that out there. Like, I don't know, Madoff comes to mind. It's very like it's like 90 minutes of this guy's bad and this is why he's bad, and I think that holds zero curiosity for me about something like that. Whereas the more
Yeah.
I read about this guy, and I think specifically as an outsider, someone who didn't know crypto so well, there was just so much more going on that I found really fascinating. And like, I was one of these people also who was stuck home, trading on Robinhood or kind of dipping a toe into that. So it felt like, oh, this is the thing that we all experienced. And to me, the zeitgeist was far more interesting than just somebody who may or may not, well, I guess I should say may or may not, but he's already been convicted. So someone who did some pretty heavy financial crimes.
Yeah.
Felt like we were
You,
all part of it at the same time.
yeah. You do capture very well this sense that the guy is sort of slightly delusional.
Mm,
That he's very, very bright, but he's living in a kind of dream, isn't he? And a sort of
yeah.
denial of consequence. He's just so
Mm,
used to being successful, and he mixes with people who are, and he has this dream that he can build something out of all this chaos, which is what it is
yeah.
at the end. And yet, and then he said, "I'd never realized it got this bad." And it's like, hello, but and yet you believe him. I don't know whether he's just
Yeah.
very good at presenting himself in that way on a camera, but everything you assembled in your film certainly feels like this guy actually does sort of. He didn't set out to scam people or any of those things. You just feel like he had this rather crazy dream that got completely out of hand, and he spent the
Yeah.
last few months when everything was imploding in a state of denial.
I
Did
think
did
it's
did
very
you feel that?
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's very difficult for people to see a crime or like a disaster of this magnitude and not ascribe some Machiavellian motive to it. You see something like this and you think this guy must have been a predator from the beginning. And I mean, and that's also what made this such an interesting topic for me. I I think I first heard of him on a podcast, and it was a Sam Harris. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but and because I was interested in effective altruism, and so I knew his material more or less. Like I didn't, I wasn't around. I wasn't in the U.S. at the time of all of the like Super Bowl spots and when this meteoric rise was happening. But nothing in his demeanor uh, suggested to me that he was that kind of a guy. And I spoke to him once, and even still, the feeling that you get is that there's some layer of context that's missing. Like I'm missing some sort of reality primer. There's something, there's some piece that if it fell into place, we would all understand it, right? That's kind of how he presents himself. Like if we just had the right information,
Yeah,
it would make
exactly. Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that information exists. I don't know if that context exists. I think that
Yeah, hence the delusion, possibly.
he's just
Yeah.
living in some sort of a world that, like, I don't think he's a bad guy. I just think that he's a kind of one of one. I don't know. He was a unique presence.
Yeah.
You know.
I did wonder, because you mentioned in the film that he was a real heavy gamer, wasn't he? He played lots and
Mm,
lots of video games, and people sort of make light of that. But,
mm,
they have shown in various tests that heavy gaming can actually rewire parts of the brain. And I wonder, if you get so far into this, whether your neurology is changed by this activity to such extent that, you bring yourself to finance, crypto, and what have you, and you're still in this kind of game state.
mm.
And people who have invested with you are kind of not real. They're just part of the game. And when he
Yeah,
talks, he does come across like that. Like these people are sort of just part of the game until suddenly he's made aware that no, they're not just, ciphers in a game or what have you, avatars. They are real, living, breathing people. It's almost like he lost a connection with that reality.
I think there are like multiple layers of abstraction when you're doing any kind of high finance. And the gaming to me was always really fascinating because I mean, crypto is so abstract to begin with. I don't think anyone has an intuitive sense of what it is ever. Even when you're spending money and you're either making or losing money, it still feels like gaming in a way. So I think the vernacular was very similar. These guys often did have two screens next to each other. You know, one is League of Legends or whatever they were playing at the time. The other is like a Bloomberg terminal, essentially. And I think when you're looking at the two, it's and you might feel the same emotionality toward them both. You might feel like, I mean, one of the guys in the doc said something about them referring to like having their balances wiped out as like losing all their hit points.
Yeah,
But it doesn't feel real. I think when you're dealing with so much money, and also like if you imagine Alameda and how much wealth they accrued in such a short amount of time, it's completely it's mind bending. It's reality deranging to imagine someone going from 0 to 32 billion. That's just personal net worth in a few
yeah. It
years.
doesn't seem to
That's
connect to what we consider real work and sweat and value. It's just, as you say, it's, it's ka-ching, on a
like
machine.
I don't know what the number is that human beings have an intuitive sense of, but I know that once it goes beyond that, it could be a zillion, it could be 20 quadrillion.
Yeah,
Like it doesn't it's
yeah.
too
It's too
abstract
ab
to feel anything
yeah,
about. And I think that was the area that a lot of these guys were operating in, or at least that was my experience.
yeah. So going back to the process, you now were lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time and so on.
Mm,
Uh, what happened after they said, Bloomberg that is, said, "Hey, come on board"?
mm.
Did they throw a lot of, well, little films and clips and what have you that they had and said, I guess a lot of that film is really editing, isn't it? Because, I mean,
Mm.
I don't know how many times you actually got to interview him yourself. You said once, so
No, no, zero. We had a
right.
conversation, but we didn't record anything.
Yeah,
It was essentially them saying, "Look, we have extensive archive. Um, obviously, use any of that." They have a world class reporting team that has pretty deep connections with people who work in that field. And when this all went down, I think there were like 20 other projects that were announced. I mean, there were a lot. It was like every day it was so and so's announced that they're going to start making a film. This guy's production company, Apple's got one that's coming out. It was just like nonstop. So the feeling in the beginning was like, this is an unfolding news story and we should cover it like a news story, which is like not where I come from, and also not something that's particularly compelling to me. Like that's not a film, that's a news report or it's an article at best. So I think that the first couple months was like pulling back and slowing down a little bit and not trying to chase the thing. Like we were in the Bahamas and that was the only time that I saw him get out of the the police suburban to run into the courthouse. And we were behind a chain link fence with, people from AP and Getty and many other news outlets. And that felt a little wrong. It was like, this is stuff we could get from Media Pool. This isn't really adding that. I mean, we shot that on a Bolex, which I think is kind of goofy and fun, but it felt too much like we're chasing after a thing rather than thinking about what we're trying to say or uh, finding an angle that's actually has some appeal to someone who isn't just watching this for the spectacle, but wants to watch a film that is about something. So once he once he was finally extradited, I think there was a little less pressure to run after the thing. And it was more now like, okay, well, who do we want to talk to? Um, I had a handful of areas that I thought were interesting intellectually. Um, so then it was just a matter of giving a set of topics, or like I created an outline that I felt was kind of interesting and was based on what my understanding of the story was at the time. And Pat Regnier, the actually his job title's changed now, but he's an editor. I want to say at Business Week. is just a total crypto ace. Like he just has it all down so well. He's been covering it for so long, and his journalists that he edits have been covering it for so long. So I was able to show them outlines and say, "Did I get this right? Is there something missing? Is there some additional context that should be added to this?" And then them saying, "Well, if you like this area, you should be talking to these 5 people because I think they could give you some interesting color." And then it's such a closed group of people who are highly skeptical of journalists in general. And I would maybe say that about everyone in tech, understandably so. So there was often sometimes saying, "Oh, we're doing this thing for Bloomberg" was really helpful because it gave some sort of credibility. I mean, me just as a filmmaker on my own, I think it would have been pretty tough. And then other times, it kind of had the opposite effect. They'd say, "Oh, it's Bloomberg.
Yeah,
We
corporate.
know how you're going to
Yeah,
cover it.
yeah,
Yeah, it's going to have a negative spin on it."
yeah,
And I did not want any of that. So a lot of it was convincing people, "No, we're not doing that thing." Like I think they were expecting just a 90-minute diatribe about how bad crypto is, and like it could have been that, but I think I my position was always, who wants to watch that? You can come to your own conclusions. Um, so that yeah, so that's kind of how that came to be. And then access is such a problem. We'd have wonderful conversations with people who would say something like, "I just need to talk to the board, or I need to talk to our investors to see how they feel about it." And they'd say,
yeah,
"But
of
it's
course.
99% sure we can talk." And then
And
they'd
then
come back the
nothing.
next day, "Sorry, we can't do it." And like, I get it. I mean,
Yeah,
there's no real upside to sitting in front of a camera and saying whatever about
yeah,
some,
yeah,
captain
because
of
it might blow
industry.
back on them. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, there's
these
zero
people.
upside. So you
Yeah,
either have to be someone who's like so successful at this point that you don't care, or you're known as a personality, or so all of these other projects, I think, crumbled one by one because I imagine they were facing the same issues, but Bloomberg just had such a good relationship with these people that if there was a crack in the door, we just squeezed through it. And then the more people we spoke to, the more they talk amongst each other and say, "This guy's not trying to do a gotcha." Like these are actual conversations, and we ended up with a film.
yeah, and a thoughtful one as well. Not you're not aiming for sensation. I mean,
Mm.
it's great editing, which gives it energy, but it never felt sensational. I've seen one or two that are more in that direction, if you will.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah. I
and
wasn't
I mean,
behind the name of the film. I should also say I wasn't behind this. There's a subtitle. It's like I forget. That was kind of given to us by editorial. The what is it? Something
Ruin,
lies,
isn't it?
lies of
But
deceit.
oh,
Ruin
that's yeah, yeah, it's the
is
main
my
one. Yeah,
title,
yeah, yeah.
but the subtitle. That's there's always somebody who's going to put a little bit of a dramatic spin to it. But yeah, we didn't want to go for sensation. We wanted to go for something thoughtful and, as you say,
So how long were you working on the project? I mean, clearly months rather than a few weeks. When
yeah,
did you start?
it was fast. I mean, I think I started thinking about it and making outlines uh, November of last year. So I would say, and and we took our first shots were in December of
Okay, that's very quick.
what, 2022. Yeah,
Mhm.
so I think this thing was jamming
Yeah,
in a few months. Like we finished principal photography in February. We'd begin the edit, see what was missing. More people would come out of the woodwork and say, "Hey, we'll talk to you now." And like as Sam went from, you know, awaiting trial to house arrest to having his bail revoked, so on, that changed the calculus for people who were deciding whether they wanted to talk. So we were still
yeah,
shooting until the end of June, um, while simultaneously editing, and then I think we delivered the film second week of October, something like that. So it was fast. Yeah, it's like maybe 10 months, 10, 11 months, which I think
and
is insane for a doc.
I saw it on YouTube. Did you have any other kind of distribution outlet?
Yeah, the film had an agent at WME, and from what I understand, there were one or two other projects that were being shopped at the same time, um, but access was an issue. I can't remember specifically what the notes were, but like they had a first look deal, with, I want to say, Amazon. Uh, Many different people saw it, and some were undecided, some passed. That part gets a little hazy for me, because I was working on the edit all day long, so I had very little bandwidth to deal with anything else. But I think the problem, and why so many of these other docs fell apart is like it was almost impossible to talk to the people who were directly a part of this. I mean, no one at Alameda, no one at FTX, really, with the exception of like Brett Harrison, was willing to speak. Um, Sam's parents, I mean, we were
Yeah,
talking
with a
to them.
court case, it's difficult, isn't it?
You know,
Who's
it's
gonna
yeah,
talk? Yeah.
like it's again, there's no upside for anyone to talk. So I think I think quite a few of the networks are expecting like traditional access and coverage, but it's like with something like this, I think you'd be lucky to get it 5, 10 years after the fact, you know. So um, we showed a few rough cuts, but I mean the film had evolved considerably since the rough cuts. And in the end, Bloomberg was really happy to have this as their first original. So they thought there were some channels. I know it sounds very vague and unspecific, but I just can't remember who they were, who were quite willing to launch it and happy for that, but they wanted it exclusively. But Bloomberg felt like if we're not getting like a major release, we might as well do it ourselves, and which is cool. I mean, this is the beginning of Bloomberg Originals, so
Yeah,
at
makes
least
sense.
at films. So yeah, so they were happy to do it.
Totally makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know.
And you said when you were editing, did you work with an editor or were you
Oh
working
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Alvaro Del at Cabin Editing Company. And Cabin, I've worked with a bit. I've worked with Alvaro for years. He's edited quite a few films of mine, and
Yeah, it's very well done. Did you
yeah.
start off with, "Hey, here's my outline. This is kind of our structure, and then let's just
Hmm.
put in some of the pieces and then shift them around, and I'll come and sit with you, and we'll work through it and tidy
Yeah,
it
I
up a
mean,
bit," and
more or less. Like, I don't like to be too prescriptive
mm.
for anyone's first round, and that's true of all my collaborators. Because I don't know, I kind of feel like, what's the point then? So that goes for like my composer, goes for my DP. I like them to just give it their spin first, because more often than not, I mean, I love to work with these people because I think we have similar taste and I admire what they do. So to get that real value add, I like to see what they do with it. Now, this was a little bit different because it's such an esoteric story. And I think unless you're following it, I mean, he would have had to spend months to catch up. So I gave him an outline that was like, here's the story as I experienced it. Here are the high level points. This person worked for this company. This person worked for this company. There was some money here. Here's Terra Luna. And then so he had a sense of how it went down, but when he finally gave me a cut, I mean, the original film was maybe 3 hours long. I mean, it was insane and it was wild. Um, he had added so much additional context in the same way that I had as like an outsider to this industry. That we had something that like was a nice confluence of our intellectual pursuits, stuff that we found fascinating. That we had a film that I think was quite unique and different as a result of it. And then all the AI stuff was and continues to be an area of interest for me. And the problem we were always going to have, and it was a conversation that we had, I think, after the first couple weeks of filming, was like, what the hell do we show? Right? I mean, it's like abstruse math. Is people typing? It's like screens. It's like, I mean, there's I don't know how you do this. This is crazy. So there must be a metaphor here that we can work with, and like, and then there's the whole gaming thing. So we started playing around with the first iterations of Gen 1, Runway ML, DID was happening at the time. I think Midjourney was at version 4 at that point. Um, ChatGPT was at 3.5. So like some of these, uh, sorry, and what was the main one that we used for all of the animations? Sorry, it'll come to me in a second. Um, they were kind of like beginning or like maybe midway through becoming on their way to becoming like incredible. So
Was that your editor creating those, or did you bring in other people for that?
so one of our assistant editors, Sean, he and I were like had been on parallel paths here, reading and playing with this AI, and so when it started, um, I made some oblique reference to using these tools, and he said, actually, I've been fooling around with this on my own time. He showed me some of what he'd been doing. Alvaro, my editor, loved it. I loved it. So we started playing around. This was Stable Diffusion, sorry. That's what I was blanking on.
Oh, okay.
So he'd been working in Stable Diffusion, and it was kind of perfect. It's a little weird and otherworldly, and uh, we needed some sort of a technique or a device that would bring us through, like that would bring us from one thing to another, like you know, here's the feeling of a newspaper landing, all the way to like here's a busy room of reporters, because it all happened so fast. We needed something that felt like that, something that felt like an intense evolution in a compressed amount of time, which is I think kind of the story of FTX or crypto in general. um, so we did so many iterations until we finally landed on something that felt right. And I think it gave it such atmosphere and mood, and that was sort of, it was just again great timing because we needed something, and that did the trick.
Yeah. Did you actually, talking about how the whole thing came together, did you use music as you were cutting? I mean, did you like bring in your sound
Oh
design
yeah,
and say, look, this is where we are at the moment. Can you give us a bit of a mood here? Because that will help us cut the
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Andrew Kogan, my composer, we've made 20 odd films together, more probably, and he's a friend of mine. We were friends first. He's played in the band, a musician, and I remember the first film I brought to him. I said, "You think you can make music for this? Like, how do you feel about it?" He's like, "I think I could do this. Let's do it." So we spend a lot of time listening to music anyway, sharing tracks, just as people who are interested in music do. So when this project came about, we just started creating playlists that kind of had a vibe. We wanted something that referenced gaming, something that had these like big decaying synth hits, and like was kind of retro future at the same time. Like uh, the reason we used Polaroids and 16 millimeter in addition to these, RELFs was again playing with this idea that something is abstract until it becomes very real. You can play with all these numbers, you can play with these balances that don't really mean anything until the FBI is knocking on your door, which feels very real. So there was something kind of nostalgic and something kind of detached and abstract about it. And those were the kind of tracks that we were populating this playlist with. So I mean, you always need temp music, especially when you're cutting something like this. Like Alvaro, when he's not doing this kind of stuff, he's making huge commercials for Volvo and Super Bowl spots. And he's a top tier commercial editor, so everything is very rhythmic and fluid and quick, and there's no way to come into this without having some kind of temp music. But often, what happens with temp music is, it kind of guides the compositions perhaps a little bit more than you would like. You get used to stuff, you get attached to it, and it can be kind of a violent departure when you finally hand over your film to your composer. And if he or she is doing their job, you should get something back that you know fits the
Oh,
film
yeah. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
it should. But often, you start getting used to a thing. You go, it's a great track. I like what you're doing here, but I think we had really good tent before, and I really didn't want to be in that space. So uh, when Andrew finally finished the compositions, I mean, they were perfect. Really, I was so happy with the music. He even put the score on Spotify. I mean, so many times we've done films and they end up on YouTube, and there's always someone in the comments who's like, "Oh, what's going on at this timestamp? I can't Shazam it or whatever." So yeah, there wasn't too much of a departure. Um, Alvaro also. like all of us are friends, out of work. So
Yeah. I
we're
thought it
sharing
captured
things and
very
everything,
well a sense of rise and fall on a sort of heroic and epic sort of scale, but at the same time, there's this kind of mysteriousness,
Mm.
especially in the center of the film, and a
That
kind of
was,
hint
yeah. I'm
of
glad you got
something,
that.
and the crime aspect of it began to build as we get toward the climax of the whole story. It's very good.
That was also like why we shot so many buildings, like at night. I mean, we were in Singapore for about a week, and it was pouring rain during the day, and just kind of steamy and mysterious at night. And that was sort of the feeling, I think, in general, of like dealing with I don't know, distributed finance. Like it's impossible to get a sense of like where the locus is. So it feels, you're looking up at these really towering and imposing buildings with anonymous lights on, and it just always felt mysterious. You're
Yeah,
driving through Washington D.C. with its like weird brutalist architecture, these hidden corridors of power. The whole film kind of felt like that. This mysterious force that's having such a big impact on people's lives that you can't even pinpoint. And or when you do, it's like a room of servers and people who are kind of gaming and kind of trading at the same time. It's just all
yeah.
of it is.
It sort of walks alongside a conspiracy of sorts, although it's not a
Mm.
conspiracy. It has that kind of, it begins to get that kind of feel to it. Yeah.
That's the thing. The only part of it that is intuitive is that it does feel like a conspiracy and it feels weird and wild. But the point is, it's like a banal conspiracy when you get to it. Like that was the other thing. I had such an idea of what a server, or sorry, of what an exchange would look like, or what a crypto mining farm would look like. They're just not that interesting, though. They're kind of boring, you know?
Yeah,
The
room full of
reality is
servers or
that,
whatever. Yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
like a render farm for, 3D. Just a bunch of computers, churning over and dumping heat into the room. And then same thing with an exchange. It looks like a WeWork co-space. It's just not that
yeah,
cinematic.
yeah,
So, the feeling of what you think it is, I think, is far more interesting than the reality of it.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So you have a really good team, creative team, your editor, your DP, your
Mm.
core team, and so on. How did you work with editorial at Bloomberg? I mean, when did they step in and say, "Yeah, we like this, we don't like that,
They
more of
were
this"?
actually they were actually super cool. I mean, I don't think there was ever like a hard prescriptive set of notes they gave. I mean, the notes were more like, you know, this could be a little clearer. Like explaining Terra Luna was difficult to begin with, right? And I think we just provided enough information there so that people got the sense of like, okay, this was a big piece and it kind of worked like this, but we're not going to get into super specifics of it. It was mainly that, like, oh, I think you could punch up this area a little bit more. I'm not sure how clear that is. Um, it was never like, oh, we don't like this or we don't like how this person is treated. I mean, Jesse Powell, for instance, has has quite a personality, and I think there are people who love him and there are people that hate him. So I always got the sense that there's a few characters in the film that are like controversial, um, who are in the film for very specific reasons. Sometimes because they're controversial, and I think that was interesting. Um, and I was expecting some pushback there, but honestly, they were just cool and supportive, and you know, kind of let us do our thing. And I think the other thing, uh, which is advantageous, is like a good friend of mine told me pretty early on in my career that the best place to be, and I think it was his agent who told him this, was best place to be is in a place that has good resources and a lot of chaos, um, which was kind of what this was. It was like, we had great resources behind us, but the nature of what we were doing, I think, was so different to what they normally get, that it's hard to give notes on something that is just so beyond what you were expecting in the first place. It's like you
Yeah,
you
so
you
perhaps you had
have
more. creative control doing this kind of a project than, say, I don't know, a bank going belly up. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
thing. Like, or you know, if for instance we would have made this for like Netflix with their money, I think it would have been notes nonstop. But instead, you know, we were all sort of intrepid in a way, and we're trying to make something that we thought was interesting, and also like something that we would want to watch. Um,
It's
so
interesting, really, because
you know,
I'd almost have thought it was the other way round, in the sense that Bloomberg obviously are a, hub of financial thinking,
mm.
uh, and they are the experts, and therefore they might have a stronger sort of editorial view on things. But maybe that's why they didn't, because they trusted you with a story that's slightly outside their usual day to day.
Well,
And
yeah. I mean, the mission from the beginning was like, we don't want to make this necessarily for like an audience that's financially literate, or like maybe that's not the right way to put it, but it wasn't supposed to be a technical film for people who had a subscription to Terminal, for instance. It was like, I would like to be able to make something for someone who has a passing familiarity. Maybe they saw one of the commercials for FTX. Maybe they have a friend who was hawking some shitcoin to them and said you should buy in. You know, like that to me. And I think also by not making such a specialized film, you were going to get something that had more of like a human core, something that resonated more than just like, hey, you wouldn't believe the math they were using to come up with these trading scenarios. So I think because we were going down that road, and we spoke to a lot of their journalists who are the people who ostensibly would have been giving us notes, uh, there wasn't much to give notes on, because like, we spoke to them directly. We got their story directly, and you know, and where we ended up was like a nice, I don't know, I guess on a Venn diagram of like technical and
yeah, I thought so.
financial.
Good,
Here's what
well
happened,
balanced.
and then
Yeah,
here's the human interest part. We ended up somewhere in the middle, I think, organically.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Good. Since the film, have you been approached by other people to do that kind of a subject? That
Oh
either
yeah,
financial? Yeah. Okay.
yeah. I think
Makes sense.
I think one day after the film came out, I got a long email from someone pitching me like several crypto projects, which I guess, I mean, I understand how someone arrives at that, but it's like, my God, this is the last thing I want to be doing right now. It's another crypto doc. Like, no.
Yeah.
uh,
Were these cryptos that had sort of shady dealings, or what was it? The kind of thing.
uh, they were more just like, like one was specifically about like Coinbase founder, or I think Tails. They're all kind of the same story. I think fundamentally, like unless it's about a cult figure within that space, like why these companies got into doing what they're doing, what they're hoping to do, how the audience or how the public at large interacts with them. It's like, I don't know. To me, they're all kind of the same story. So they're not, or at least the way I would tackle them. If I'm like focusing on the stuff that I find interesting and compelling, it's just the same story again and again. So not
Did you
not
come
not for
across?
me.
Did you come across at all Hyperverse? That name? Uh,
Hyperverse.
yeah, they ran this sort of scheme that gets you to invest in blockchain technology, basically.
Hmm.
And I don't want to take up too much time on the show talking about that, but it was a, you put your money in and you get a return on it, and the return on it was, I suppose, like most things, when you think too good to be true, it probably isn't going to work out. But so
Yeah.
I did some due diligence in talking to people who'd already invested, and they were able to withdraw money, and they're very happy with the return and so on. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, the whole thing collapses, rather like certain Ponzi schemes you mentioned, Madoff. You just think, well, I don't know what the actual denouement is.
Mm.
Why could I never get my money out? Why could other people suddenly not get their money out? I just don't know. But
Mm.
I think there are a lot of schemes out there offering amazing returns, and possibly they happen in the first few months or even a year or whatever, and then, rather like most Ponzi schemes, they collapse. They just implode
Yeah.
because they're not based on actual real money. you
Hmm.
know, have you come across similar
Yeah, I mean,
setups?
on that note, like, there's two things going on. I think, like, one is 10%, a guaranteed 10% return is insane. But 10% doesn't sound like a lot to someone who is a novice investor. I think if you ask the average person, like, well, what do you think is a good return on your portfolio, or if you put $100 into something, I have no idea what they would say it is. Now, I got as a part of doing this doc. I mean, Bloomberg gave me a subscription to Bloomberg, right? Because so many of the articles I had to read were behind paywalls. It made sense, and I read a lot. I mean, it became really fascinating to me, and like I follow the markets now, and I it's like a sport. But I know enough, even as a novice myself, to hear something like guaranteed 10% returns. Like I've got some friends who are like, they'll ask me now, like, hey, there's this crypto scheme, and or I know these two investors, and they're starting this very exclusive fund, and it's guaranteed 10%. And I'm like, I'm looking at the way things are going now. Like, that's insane. They're either doing something dodgy, or they're it's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah,
There's no way
yeah,
around it.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah,
there's an aspect of that, and then there's another, which is like there's a certain there's a certain like musical chairs element to it. Like when you hear people talking about taking profit, like I think for a novice, again, you want to put your, like, what does Warren Buffett say? What is it? It's better to time in the market is better than timing the market. So
uh,
like if you're someone who times the market because you've got some experience, you can buy into one of these things, and you know when to get out. You know when, like, hey, I've just had some insane returns. It's probably best that I cash out now. But if you're new to this stuff, you throw your money in there and you sit on it like it's some sort of a retirement strategy, and you just get toasted. I mean, we spoke to a woman in the Bahamas. There was that whole group of guys, Bit Boy, Loudmouth. Like, these guys are ridiculous and hilarious. And we got a little bit of. There were some people who were upset that they were even in the film, but I put them in the film because they were it was obvious how ridiculous they were, and they were saying things like, "Oh, you shouldn't have given them a platform." But it's like, no, I mean, use your head. These guys. We put them exactly in the context they belong. And anyway, they brought a bunch of people down who lost money either on Celsius or on FTX. And I spoke to one woman who was like, I don't know, 65 or something. Like, it is part of an interesting demographic to me, which is like sort of your techno savvy grandparents, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Like my girlfriend's grandparents downstairs. I mean, they've got like a Nokia brick phone they can barely figure out. But there's a handful of people in that generation who post on Reddit and are up on this kind of stuff and have no issues navigating this technology. And she sold her house and put it on Celsius because, again, she's getting these 10% returns, and is like, of why would I have my money, in whatever retirement funds or traditional, when I can be getting stuff back like this? And she lost everything. Um,
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, quite a
you
few
know,
people have fallen for these things in such a big way. I mean, I lost, 3 grand, which is not comfortable, but,
on FTX or like
no,
a
not
similar.
FTX, no, this type of burst thing, it just disappeared,
Yeah.
3
So
grand. So
I
that's a bit painful,
it's like that.
but a house,
Oh yeah,
or your
yeah.
entire savings, it's like, what the hell
It
were
was
you
house
thinking?
savings, her grandkids' inheritance. It was a lot of stuff. So I don't know. I
Mm.
guess there's some like Aladdin's cave thing going on where you could fill your pockets with jewels as long as you make it to the door on time. But I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe people are thinking like that. Like, this is probably too good to be true. But like, I'll just get some money coming in for now, and I'll time it perfectly and step out. But I don't know. It's gonna keep happening. I don't see why it won't. There's always someone who's up for it.
Before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you, what is your process as well for branding content? I mean, are you busy pitching to, whether it's Ford, Nike, or what have you?
Mhm.
Do they come to you? Do you have an agent? How do you get these branding content?
No. So the series that I did for Marriott, the first season of that was this classic example of like good resources and high chaos. And I think I got that job because the director that they wanted to couldn't do it, and he recommended me. And he recommended me because I'm a good friend of his, not because I was the right person for the job. Um, so I went into this situation where they were like, "Yeah, we need some like 5-minute films and inspire people to travel. We want to make it about some artists." And my background was making TV commercials. So I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew how to make something look good, and I I thought, well, if I have this commercial vernacular, maybe I can mix it with the doc world a little bit and come up with something that's unique. And I don't know what they were expecting, but what we gave them, I think again, they were just completely nonplussed and didn't know how to even give notes on it. So,
Okay.
but needless to say, like they were very happy. So, and we worked so hard on those. I think because we realized very early that we were making something quite special. So when those came out, um, I started getting approached by brands and by producers and by production companies who were like, "We liked what you did there. You know, here's someone else who wants to make one." And sometimes their ideas or concepts were pretty well rendered. Other times they weren't. They may have given me some boards or something that they thought was a direction they wanted to go in, but like as soon as we began, it was obvious that we were going to go completely in a different direction. Um, and I think it's also one of those things where the more you do, the less people have to trust you to do it. Like again, I had no business making the films that I did for Marriott initially. I don't think I had any business making this doc for Bloomberg, but I did, and fortunately, I think we did a good job of it. But I guess I'm not pitching because people see something and they're like, "We like that vibe. We want that for ourselves. What would you do?" Um, and that's kind of how it comes about. And then I just form good relationships with the various producers that I work with, and you know, stuff just keeps kind of trickling out.
Did
I've
they
been
provide you
fortunate.
with a producer, or you just picked your own producer for the Marriott series?
For the Marriott series, it was the production company that hired me for that job, so I didn't in that case. But then I don't know. A lot of the people that I've ended up working with over the years have just been kind of nice chance encounters that I really liked them, and they were very good at what they did. So um, I may not have chosen them, but we definitely chose each other moving forward. So
Yeah,
that's
great
how that happened.
DP on the Marriott one where you're in Rome. I don't know if it was Anna. I forget the last
Yeah,
name, but
Anna Francesa Solana.
yeah,
She's
very good.
amazing.
Yeah,
We still work together. She did also the third series of the Marriott with the cowboy and Argentina and Chef.
yeah,
I mean, she's now making films and series. I mean, she just did. It's called Expats. It's a big series with Nicole Kidman, and they shot in Hong Kong during COVID, and that's coming out. Yeah, all of these people have that I love to collaborate with. I feel like I've really matriculated into something great. I was the only one that kind of just kept doing smaller things, but now I've got a film, so I feel a little bit better. We're all
How
the
did you
same
get together
caliber.
with How did you get together with Anna? Was that again a
Same
friend?
deal. I mean, no,
Okay.
like the production company was like, "Hey, we need a DP for this," so they put some names up, and some people just like they have it. I don't know how to describe it. It's that what that it is different for everyone, but like I can oftentimes the people that I like to work with, we don't even necessarily need to talk about the job. We could talk about, you know, cooking or music or photography. Um, the idea is like, do we have some sort of like taste overlap? Do we have some symmetry there? And if we do, I think that everything else will work out quite well. So that's how I just saw some photography that she'd done, and I just felt like she's going to be amazing, and that was it.
Yeah.
You, yeah,
Shan, are you getting my picture? Because I'm frozen on mine and you're frozen on yours.
yeah, your picture is
Damn.
probably moving at about one frame per
Oh God.
minute.
Yeah. I don't know what. Yeah. This is not good. New platform and it's already doing this. Damn.
I mean, I'm
Yours
sure it's me. I'm sure it's me. I'm streaming from my phone. Uh, my
really?
network's pretty good, but it's as long as
Yeah.
the audio stream hasn't corrupted. I'm hoping.
Yeah, quite. Let's hope. Yeah. We might just have to use the audio if that's the case, which would be bloody annoying. But there you go. Um, so that's a bit thrown me off track. What
Yeah,
were we
so
talking about?
that's how Anna came to me. We were looking for DPs, and the producer Carmen Seaman Rubio was a friend of Anna's, and she kind of slipped her name in there last minute. And a few of the DPs that we were looking at, they had tons of experience doing this kind of stuff. And Anna didn't have as much work as they did, but ooh, Nick, you've just gone black. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm back.
Oh, there we go. Oh, now you're
Yeah.
back. Now your
Finally, they
video's back
decided
on.
to give us a picture back. Yeah.
There
Right.
we go.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I don't know. She just had. I was looking at her stuff, and I was like, she has the thing. She has the thing. That's it. It's what my editor Alvaro refers to as sensitivity. And when people have that, I just know it's going to be a good collaboration. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, for
that's
sure.
it.
Yeah.
You know,
And who was your editor on, let's say, the Rome film?
that was a guy called Philippe. What is his last name? He was actually, and it was the same situation. He wasn't even really an editor. We couldn't find any editors that I liked. Um, I wanted to work with Alvaro, but he wasn't available yet, and I hadn't even met him. Somebody had given me his name and was like, "This guy's really good." And I looked at his stuff and I was like, "This guy's amazing." But again, like kind of just getting going. Uh, Philippe was a director from Brazil who had just moved to New York, and I guess he was doing some editing work. I mean, a lot of directors have done some editing work in the past. I certainly have because you're not living off directing at first, so you have to take whatever
Yeah.
you can get. And that was kind of his situation. And I think I saw a few of the commercials that he directed, and he was obviously a very talented guy. He had great taste. Not a traditional editor, um, but again, like he had the thing. So I thought, well, he'll be fine. We'll make it work. And he did. He had great ideas and was able to execute the weird stuff that we were shooting, and that's how that came to pass.
With your VOs, do
Mhm.
you write a VO and then get your subject to read and then you
Mm.
work with that? I mean, do you actually start with, say, the VO, both as a
No,
script? No?
it's when I do let's use Nike for example. I'll always like begin the interview. That'll be the first thing that we shoot. And there's a lot of phone conversations and I guess pre interviews just to get an idea of like what could this story be, and that'll of course inform the way we schedule the shoot. But then I'll do the interview first, and there's always something in that, like a 20% addition to the shooting, right? Someone will say something and you'll think, "Ooh, there's a good metaphor we can use. That's just over here. Let's save a few hours for this." And then in my head, some of the quotes that I'm remembering from the interview are forming the framework of the film. And then, you make an edit, and on occasion there have been some areas where sometimes sometimes the subject has a very good sense of what their story is, and other times they will get to it with 700% more words. So, you know,
That's what I was wondering because, how do you
yeah,
squeeze it into 5 or 6 or 7 minutes if you've got somebody who just loves to talk
yeah,
and doesn't take a breather and is not aware of the world of editing where you need to make cuts and so on, and so it's kind of just rolls into the next statement, and you
yeah,
need to cut this up into a coherent
exactly.
voiceover.
When
Yeah,
it's when that has been an issue, and that has been an issue, I would say 50% of the time, right? And that's fine because like nobody
yeah,
is we don't talk to film, right? We talk
yeah.
for reality. And um if we can't construct something out of their words, oftentimes what I'll do is I will write some lines for them and say like, because this to me seems to be the essence of what you were trying to express with way more. I'll send it to them and I'll say, is this accurate? And oftentimes they'll say, yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say. And I say, great, because we're going to come and do some pickups because I cannot cobble a sentence together based on what you gave us. So I would say that that happens, I don't know, half the time. I would do it every time if I could, just because, like, also you might make a sequence that works really well and it's beautiful and you're like, ooh, if only we had this line, this would tie it all together so perfectly. And I think the line is honest and I guess reflects or represents what this person was about to begin with, so it doesn't feel like total fiction. But then at the same time, like, I don't really care. I as long as it's a film that people like and connect with, I don't like some. I'm not I don't consider myself a documentarian for this reason. Like, I'm not. I want to tell a good story, and I want it to be a vision that was in my head, right? And sometimes what you have in front of you in reality isn't always what was in your head. So as long as we can be honest about the essence of what a thing is, I'm happy to recreate something or I'm happy to write a line. Like, that's okay as long as it's connecting with people emotionally and it means something and it's elevating what the material was. I'm completely okay with that. Like, I'm not
Yeah,
hardcore. I'm not out there just with a. That's not me. So yeah,
sounds good.
yeah.
Hey, Shan, I think we should wrap up here before we have another collapse of the camera.
Right on,
But
right on.
thanks so much for talking to me. It's been
Yeah, it's
great.
great to meet you. Thanks so much for having me.
Cool.